There are no emergencies to God. He's not worried. He's not in a hurry. Our problem often is that we want everything to be now, to be immediate. But the Bible shows us how God often works in a way that we deem to be slow, but in a way that brings about an outcome that we could barely imagine. And Joseph's obedience and faith is a shining example of that.
This is Mission 66, an adventure through God's Word. This program is brought to you by TWR in partnership with the Bible teaching ministry of Dr. Luis Sayao. We're currently in the book of Genesis. You can follow along with your downloadable study guide at mission66.org. Now let's dive in with our teacher, John Matthews, and co-host Esther Sisulu.
Welcome to our program of Basic Bible Study with explanations to help us understand the text. And lately we've been in a series in the book of Genesis, and of course this is the first book of the Bible, and today we'll be looking at chapters 40 and 41. Now here, we'll see how God brought young Joseph out of the pit and into the palace of Egypt. Now friend, if you feel like God has forgotten you, I want you to check out how God uses even bad circumstances to free those who remain faithful to Him. And our teacher, John Matthews, will present today's theme, From the Pit to the Palace.
Esther, thank you so much. Great to be with you as always, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66, wherever you join us from today. Great to have you with us as we reach a fascinating part of the story of Joseph. In recent episodes, we've seen Joseph sold as a slave into Egypt by his angry brothers, and he ends up as a house servant in the home of Potiphar, who's a local official. Then Potiphar's lustful wife tries to seduce him. He flatly refuses, so in return she accuses him falsely, and he, Joseph, is now sent to prison unjustly. Now, it's a story that seems to be yielding unfairness upon unfairness or certainly as it seems to us as we read it. But what we're looking at and what we're finding out is that God has a plan behind everything. And what we're going to find out is that He's working in Joseph's life. He's building up his character, as often He does with us through the toughest of times that we just don't understand. They make no sense to us. But what God is doing with Joseph, as He does still today with us, He's making us ready for just reward. He's molding our characters to make us effective for His kingdom. So chapter 40 says that when Joseph is put in prison, he wins the favour of the prison warden, and as it happened, the royal cupbearer and the baker were in the same cell as Joseph. Why? Well, they defended Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt. Doesn't say what they did, but here they were in prison with Joseph right next to him. So let's read then Genesis 40, beginning at verse 5. And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. And when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with them in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." Joseph has had experience with dreams himself, as we know. He knew what they meant. He was willing to share the interpretations with his family, but nobody, if you remember back then, was remotely interested in hearing what he had to say, because those dreams seemed to indicate that Joseph's family members would one day come to him and bow down before him. They mocked and ridiculed him as a result of those dreams. But here he is now in Egypt, and the king's butler and the baker begin coming to him for help with their dreams. And verse 9 goes on by saying, "So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, 'In my dream there was a a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph then, listening, said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as once you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house, for I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "Well, I also had a dream, and there were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." And Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you." Well, on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. That's the end of Genesis 40, and Genesis 41 is really a continuation of that account. The chief baker's broken promise then results in a delay for Joseph, and that delay is, well, a costly one, because it means he spends 2 more years in that pit. But again, we're going to see how God was going to bring him from the pit to the palace. This is Genesis 41. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly thin cows ate the 7 attractive plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke, and he fell asleep, and dreamt a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret those dreams to Pharaoh. But then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "I remember my offences today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamt on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard, and when we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged." Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Behold, in my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile, and they fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I've never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate the first 7 plump cows, but when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as in the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 ears, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that's going to follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers of the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine." Well, this proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his 2nd chariot, and they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus Pharaoh set Joseph over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-Paneah. This name he was given was not from either Egyptian or Hebrew, but it meant revealer of mysteries, Zaphenath-Paneah. And Pharaoh gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 plentiful years the earth produced abundantly. And he gathered up all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Now, before I go on, just a point to say these 2 chapters are lengthy, but they tell the complete account of how God was working behind the scenes to put Joseph right, not where Pharaoh wanted him, but right where God wanted him, in that palace, to bring about the purposes which he had. So let's finish the chapter. Verse 50. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore them to him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For, he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. And there was famine in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph. What he says to you, do. So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all of the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. And that is Genesis chapters 40 and 41. Esther.
Well, thanks, John. Yes, this is Mission 66, where we study each chapter of the Bible with commentary from our friend and teacher, John Matthews. And I must say, this was a fascinating study of these 2 chapters. And it got me thinking, John, whether all the dreams that we have, or dreams in general, whether they have a meaning or perhaps can be interpreted in some way.
Yeah, it's a good question, Esther. Do you know, I think most times our dreams are what you would call regular sorts of things, when you wake up and say, well, that didn't make a lot of sense. You know what it's like. Dreams put people from different parts of your life in the same place in an odd context sometimes. But look, the book of Ecclesiastes, written by Solomon, says, a dream comes when there are many cares. So many times I think our dreams are a reflection of our experiences, or things that may be weighing heavily on our overly stimulated, busy minds. And in the Bible, there's also a certain type of dream that is similar to a vision. Now, we do find this happening often in the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testament. There was, you remember Jacob's dream of a stairway from heaven? Here is Pharaoh of Egypt having dreams that must be interpreted by Joseph, King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of 4 world empires that would come about. And his dream had to be interpreted, do you remember, by Daniel. Later, Joseph, husband of Mary, would have a dream warning him to take the young Jesus to Egypt for a time in order to protect him from Herod. Joel the prophet said in the last days that God would pour out his Spirit on all flesh. And he said, your old men would dream dreams, your young men would see visions. Now, that doesn't mean that every dream, far from it, is a vision or a divine revelation. We have the complete Bible at this time where the people written about in the Bible, of course, they did not. So there was more, let's say, a reliance upon these dreams. And God used those dreams in a very important way.
Yeah. I actually think back to some of the dreams that I've had. And at times I feel that I've placed some meaning on dreams that had absolutely no meaning and perhaps missed out on those that might have had meaning. But I say this to say, how do we know when a dream is just, say, a regular dream or whether it's an actual message that comes from God?
Yeah, another good question. I think if when you say regular dream, I think if we have repetitive dreams that are conveying a similar point, I think there's something in that. But the truth is that if it's really from God, then the subject matter wouldn't go against anything that is written in the Bible. We'd have an instinct, and God would not in any way want to confuse us through that. I also think if a dream is truly given by God, you'll be able to know that that dream is special, unlike the other regular dreams that we might have.
You know what? That makes sense. That does make sense. Okay, so Pharaoh. Who was this Pharaoh? And why was he or how was he this powerful?
Yeah, well, he certainly was that. He was the king of Egypt, which at this time, Esther, is the most powerful country in the world. Among the Egyptians, the Pharaoh was actually considered divine, and his line was considered to be divine as well. But when we say divine, we mean according to their frame of reference in idolatry. So what we'll see in the Bible as we move through into Exodus is how the only true God, the God of creation, the author of the Bible, the Holy Bible, and the Father of our Lord Jesus, intervenes in human history to reveal himself to the Egyptians as well as to the Hebrew people. And perhaps there's an irony in that this all-powerful, in terms of earthly measures, the all-powerful Pharaoh, who is considered a demigod, he needs help from this Hebrew slave, a guy just coming out of his 20s, to interpret his dreams. Without those interpretations, then the outcome would have been incredibly bleak.
I have to say that going through the story of Joseph, it feels like there was a lot of delay in his story. I mean, think about it. Spending 2 years in prison because of the cupbearer who had promised to mention him to the Pharaoh, and in essence just forgot about him. And I know that sense of delay can make us feel frustrated at times.
Yeah, it seems a long time, and immediately as you're asking the question, I'm thinking, remember Moses who flees Egypt, and it's 40 years later that God comes to him in that burning bush with the mission for his life when he was, 80 years old? Look, I guess we need to remember that there are no emergencies for God. He's not worried. He's not in a hurry. He often, you're right, Esther, seems to take a long time to perform his wonders, but he's never late. And I think sometimes our problem is that we are used to getting things on demand, fast food, fast now, I want it now. We want everything immediately, and we do get irritated when we have to, stop for a traffic light, always stuck behind somebody who drives really slowly. That's a little confession I've thrown in there, Esther, so please don't hold it against me. But what does the Bible do? Well, the Bible shows us how God often works what we would deem to be in a slow way, but it is in a way that brings about an outcome that we could barely imagine. In fact, very often we can't even begin to imagine. And I think I know Joseph's obedience and faith is a shining example of this. He arrives in Egypt aged 17. He gets thrown into prison by Potiphar. He's got to wait until he's 30 to get to the palace. So he's probably been in prison for around 13 years. Now, we would call that a delay, but God's schedule, well, it's different to ours.
It certainly is different to ours, and I find that it's in those moments that we feel or we think that God has forgotten about us, but we've established that that just is not true.
Yeah, and that's a very real feeling that people have sometimes. But the truth is, you're right, that isn't true, because the truth is that God never forgets about anything. Joseph wasn't ready to be second in command of Egypt at the age of 17. His development was tough, but he needed development. He needed to be prepared, and that took time. He had to go through these difficulties to refine, mature, and form his character, to be made ready for this role of extreme importance, not just in the future of Egypt, but indeed in the survival of God's people.
John, thank you so much for reminding us of this truth, because we can get caught up in our own emotions when we think God has forgotten us, but we know that He's at work. So with all that we've explored today, how should we summarize Genesis 40 and 41?
Yeah, so true, Esther. Well, these chapters tell the story of Joseph after he was falsely accused, then he was thrown into an Egyptian prison, but he continues to exercise his talents and his gifts in that prison. And so eventually that means he's brought out of the pit and ends up being placed in a palace of Egypt in order to save the lives of so many people during a famine. Now, I think one of the lessons here for us is that God is in control. And as you listen to Mission 66, this may be your state right here and right now, even when things look without hope. They look so bleak. But you never know when your promotion to the palace is coming. Now, that promotion will probably look a lot different than you or I imagine, but it will likely be way beyond anything that you or I can imagine or could even think of. And that is the certainty of all who know and love God and will spend eternity with Him.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Mission 66, dear friend. And it's on that encouraging note that we say goodbye. But we'll be back again, same time, same place, and you're invited.
As Mission 66 comes to a close, be sure to download your free study guide at mission66.org. Deepen your daily devotion with insights from each episode, and let John and Esther lead you through the Scriptures. Get your study guide at mission66.org. and be prepared for our next episode. There, you can also connect with us, ask questions, or donate to help Mission 66's worldwide outreach. Head to mission66.org. Mission 66 is made possible through Transworld Radio in partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao.